I'm going to show you a technique for painting crashing waves today. And if you can get this concept down, I really think it will help you understand how to paint other variations of crashing waves as well. But first we need a basic beach scene. So I'm using an 11 by 14 canvas board. I'm tilted it horizontally today, and I painted a sky with my mop brush. You can use whatever colors you want for that. I used light blue, white, and a little bit of navy. And then you can add some clouds if you want. I like to take some white paint while my sky is still wet and just bounce them in with little circular brush strokes. I'm using my mop brush for this, but you can use whatever cloud painting technique you're most comfortable with. Maybe it's a windy day too, which is why we have the crashing waves. So what I like to do is clean off my mop brush and just use it damp while the clouds are still wet and blend in some of those edges. That makes it look like they're blowing in the wind. Once you have your basic sky, go ahead and grab a sandy color and some white, and with a clean mop brush, do back and forth strokes all the way to the bottom of your canvas. This is your basic beach scene. Once it's dry, then we can get into the important part. The very first step to the waves is painting the underpainting, or the color of the ocean. What this is going to be is a dark navy mixed with a greenish blue, and we're going to make one thick chunk of blue in the middle of your canvas. Now we want this to be pretty thick, so it's going to overlap in your sky and in your sand, but make sure your horizon line there is as straight as you can possibly make it. Something like this. Now the top half of this thick line is going to have little ripples that can be seen behind the wave. So I'm taking a small round brush with some white. You can tint it and blend it in with some of that ocean color, but do back and forth little brush strokes to make it look like the sun is shining on little ripples or tiny waves coming in from behind the wave. Now notice all my lines are straight, they are lined up horizontally, but the lines themselves are slightly wavy or kind of bumpy. They don't have to be perfectly straight lines, but you don't want them tilted to the left or the right, or it won't look natural. So I blended them in almost halfway down this dark strip of blue. Now to understand the concept of a wave, I want you to think of an infinity symbol. The waves are infinitely rolling and crashing onto the beach. This shape is so important. So we're going to make a guideline by painting an infinity symbol in the bottom hand of that dark navy that we painted for our ocean. Something like this. Now, it's stretched out a little bit. You don't want them to be too tall. And notice my left-hand side, the loop on the left, is a little bit longer than the one on the right. Something like this. Kind of looks like eyes looking at you. But there's your infinity symbol. Once you have that shape, I want you to extend out the top curve of the left-hand loop. And in the middle here, we don't want that point that's pointed down, so we're going to take the top side of that loop and just bring it over so it's a little more straight. Bring it over to the top left-hand corner of that right side loop. There. So hopefully you're following me so far. You have your infinity symbol and then a long curved line that goes over top the curve of the left loop. So on the right loop, we're also going to extend out that top curve off the picture like this. We're almost done with the guideline. On the left-hand side, also extend this bottom curve up to a point, like that. There's the finished guideline. So now we have to start filling in some directional brush strokes. To do this, I'm taking my small round brush and the same colors we used for the ocean color behind this. This right-hand side is all about the water being pulled up from the sand and curving around so that it can crash onto the left-hand side. Notice that my brush strokes are following the same curve as the right-hand side of the infinity loop, and I'm covering up the bottom side of that curve. So you shouldn't see any of the white underneath that top curve. Keep filling it in like this. It's okay if you leave a little dark towards the top side because you want to leave a little bit of shading anyway. I'm keeping this coat pretty dark, but filling in all that bottom edge. Then on the left-hand side, that top curve that curves all the way across the left loop is going to be your crashing wave. So all the way from that point on the far right, we're going to start curving lines around and down. Pretend the wave is curving over and around, almost like the same shape you would do at the top of a waterfall, because the water is falling over top of the wave and crashing onto the beach. I'm using the same color for this. Again, it's okay if it's a little lighter, but keep it pretty dark. Notice my brush strokes didn't go all the way down to the bottom of that loop either, because you want to leave a little bit for some shading. You can also add highlights to this by taking just some of the brighter green blue and highlighting the inside edges. I also added a few strokes of some white. However much detail you do, just make sure all of these brush strokes are following the same curve. That's the most important thing. And same thing on the left-hand side, I'm going to do a couple highlight strokes with the green blue and a little bit of white as well. There we go. Again, most important thing is making sure you have all your brush strokes curved in the right direction. There it is. So next, it's all about making the waves fancy. We have to add some crashing, some splashing, and some highlights. But first, let's do the highlights. We're going to take some white paint and a fan brush. This is pretty much the same technique that we use for a waterfall. We're going to very lightly dry brush on some white with your fan brush over top the top curve of your wave. So I'm basically lining up my fan brush horizontally with that top curve and pulling around and down. You want very little white paint on just the tip of your fan brush. See how it looks like you're dry brushing it on. You could also use a flat brush or any larger brush that has stiffer bristles for this. On the right-hand side, we're going to add highlights coming up from the bottom of this wave. It's highlighted on the edge of the sand. So basically the opposite. We're starting along the bottom of the wave and pulling up into the middle section. There we go. Now before we do anything else to the wave, let's make the sand look wet. We're going to take some white paint on our mop brush, watered down. We're just going to paint one long horizontal brush stroke underneath the wave onto the sand. This is the foam rolling up onto the sandy beach. And if it looks a little too crisp, you can clean off your mop brush and just use it damp to blend it in. There we go. And then you can clean up the edge of the wave and make it look like there's little ripples going onto the sand by taking a tiny round brush and doing a similar brush stroke to what we did behind the wave. You can take a combination of white and also some of the green blue and do little wavy strokes that are also horizontal. You don't want them tilting to the right or the left, but make sure you piece them in coming onto the sand so it looks like water is being pushed onto the wet part. I even went in and I watered down some of the navy on my mop brush and brought that onto the sand too, just for a little extra shading. Let's add a couple more of those white little ripples going onto the sand. And then take your brush, in case you didn't do this, before we add the crashing part to the wave, take individual brush strokes with white paint and bring them down from the wave into that foamy part so it looks like it's being pulled up into the wave. There. Now see this curve? We're going to start adding the crashing part, which means we need to give it a texture. On this right-hand side, we're going to have a small texture. So I'm just taking a small round brush and tapping white paint over top of this white line. So basically you're disguising the line to make it look like crashing water. Bring that texture down about halfway in this midsection, and then we're going to switch to a larger tool to do the big crash on the left-hand side. So see, I got there. We're going to work on this big wave over here. You could use an artist sponge for this. I'm just going to use my mop brush because I know that gives me nice big crashing texture. Take some white paint and then just tap along that curve all the way around to the other side. Now make sure you don't make your crash so big that you lose the nice shading in the middle section of your wave. And you also don't want to lose your beach either, so don't go down too far. Another tip would be to make the crash lumpy and bumpy. You don't want your water to fall super uniform. It would be crashing harder in some areas than others. And if it turns out too white, or if you get too much white, you can go back in with some navy and tap in some shading. That's up to you. I'm going to add shading and also some pops of white. And there's the wave. But don't stop there. Here's another detail that can make all the difference. Grab a splatter tool. I'm using a stiff bristled stencil brush. You could also use a toothbrush. I took some watered down white and just did little splatters with my finger along the crashing texture. You can go super crazy on this left-hand side where it's really crashing down, but try not to get it above the wave because you also don't want it to look like it's snowing. Keep it along the textured edge. So much fun. You'll be shocked how that changes everything. And then I decided my crash got really big, so I decided to go back in with some watered down navy and add a little shadow. Just keep playing around with it until you get a combination you like best. Now here's another fun little detail. Cover your painting all except for the sand at the bottom, and while you have the splatter brush out, take some light brown and dark brown and just splatter a texture along the bottom edge. That's going to give your sand a texture without actually having to glue on real sand like I have in other paintings. This is a fun extra detail that can make all the difference. I'm also going to take my brush and blend that edge with just watered down white and watered down tan, but I thought that was so much fun. And for final details, I added some birds in my sky with a detail brush, but I loved everybody's suggestions. One of the top ones was adding a lighthouse in the distance or a sailboat. You could add seashells on the beach or starfish, even like dolphins jumping out of the water. There's so many different ways you could personalize this painting. Have fun and happy painting, everybody.